Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of At Home, the show where I get a chance to talk to other folks just like you and I, friends, colleagues, family, whoever I can find out there that has just a different perspective on, what the world has been like for them over the last year to year and a half with the pandemic and working remote and all of these things. And as I got a chance to think about it this last weekend, my wife and I were talking about, a new way that I could think to describe what the show is all about. And I've gone through a few iterations of how I've talked about the impact I would love to have with At Home and bring these particular guests that I bring on. And today's guest is a really good example of that. And what it came down to me in talking to some friends this weekend, it made me realize that one of the biggest challenges I think over the last year or so is these problems with the pandemic are so big that it's really hard to get your head wrapped around it. Matter of fact, not to be, morbid or anything, but I was listening to NPR this morning and there was a comment by somebody who had called into the show to basically say that it's one thing, it's really easy to have empathy for a person or for a small group of people that you recognize. But when the numbers of, people who've been affected by COVID are so big, it's not that you don't have empathy, but it's really hard to get your head wrapped around 500,000. And it reinforces this idea that these numbers are just big, or these problems are just big. And we can't solve them all. And this show, of course, isn't aiming to solve all of those problems. What I'm really hoping to do with this, though, is to help try to make those problems for like a good 30-minute window just a little bit smaller and help us see sort of, as I've heard Simon Sinek say in the past, optimism isn't blind. It's not looking down and saying, there's no problems and there's a shining light. It's no, I'm looking through a tunnel. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of stuff in between me and that light that is going to be challenging and tough to make it tough to get there, but I can still see the light and I'm still focusing on that. And that's partly what the show is aiming to do, is to help make those problems visible, but just a little bit smaller for the time that we're talking so that you can walk away feeling just a bit more motivated about whatever it is you want to go do today. And on that note, I want to bring in today's guest. His name is Louis Caesar. He's a colleague of mine at Cisco. We've worked together for a number of years through charity events. And when I was still in sales, we worked sales opportunities together. And he's just an all-around great guy. Louis, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me. Big fan of the At Home series, by the way.
Awesome, dude. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's always so funny when you post videos as a YouTuber or whatever else. When you put content out there, you can see through subscribers and notifications that people do watch it, but you don't know who the people are and you don't know what kind of impact it has on them, if any at all. So it's always nice to be able to bring someone who has actually watched some of the content and to get sort of like just to hear that it does resonate with some folks. It's motivating, and I think in large part that's why I wanted to really have you on the show today, because. And I'll let you do your intro here in just a second. The breadth of things that you are involved with personally, professionally, and the new things that you are creating for yourself, I think can be a real motivator to people watching this show, because you are a great example of how to take something that is clearly a very adverse and challenging situation for anybody and turn that into something that is positive and motivating and creates some momentum for you to go forward. So I won't say any more. I'll let you introduce yourself.
No, I appreciate the kind words, Jeff. So Louis Caesar, currently a Cisco partner account manager, now supporting our web region. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show. And to your point, I think one of the biggest challenges I had to look in the mirror is how am I going to disrupt myself to still be impactful and still build those genuine relationships with both my partners and direct sales teams and really individuals that I work with on a day in and day out basis now that we're not traveling and meeting with people face to face. So it's been a real opportunity, real lessons learned, but I think using technology to find ways to amplify our voice and learn about others is, I've been truly connected and really getting a kick out of it. So it's been great.
That's awesome, dude. I'm glad you kind of started there with this idea of like the empowerment and using technology to do these things, but then also finding ways to kind of branch out. And I'd love to kind of start a bit, you and I have done volunteer work in the past for different charities. We've been on, we've volunteered to do certain things, but you do a lot of other, not just volunteer work, but you advocate for some other Bay Area charities and things like that. And I'd love to hear about some of the work that you do with those groups and who they are, and you can tell the audience about them. I'd also love to kind of explore a bit how this last year and a half has shaped the way in which you engage with those groups and the way in which you look at taking those opportunities to either volunteer or to give back and doing something different. So if we could start there, like how has this last year and a half, shaped the way that you approach, not just being a parent now, but also these volunteer groups that you work with on a regular basis?
Absolutely. My favorite quote is from Pablo Picasso. So the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. So I'm currently living through that right now, that echo chamber, and finding ways to truly give back. I truly believe in servant leadership. That was something that my parents instilled in me when I was little, just having that growth mindset. When you start something, you finish it through, but most importantly, how can you look for ways to empower others? And so really my journey begins really 3 years ago when I fortunately lost my mom to cancer. And, that was a really tough and challenging time in my life. If anyone has ever experienced the loss of a parent, it's the worst thing that you can go through. And so, especially for me, with my mother being so close to her, she was my main confidant and someone I really confided in. And so really these 3 past years have been my journey of these peaks and valleys and trying to discover how can I repurpose my pain and pouring into others. And so by doing that has been very, very therapeutic for me. And so I've now proud to say that I sit on the board of directors with the Bay Area Cancer Connections out in Palo Alto. This is a nonprofit organization that really thrives on working with people that have been affected by cancer, and connecting them with resources and best practices on how on where they should go to for help and assistance, because really that there's power in information. And so sometimes when you're diagnosed, the biggest question in the room is what do I do next? So with me being here at Cisco, I've been blessed to use my platform as they're also looking for ways to disrupt themselves within this COVID period, as far as how can I still maintain that intimate connection with the clients that I'm serving and utilizing technology to maybe expand beyond the Bay Area. So whether it's utilizing our WebEx technology or taking a look at their network infrastructure, we've been really finding ways to help them from a philanthropic perspective. And that's been very, very just rewarding for me so far.
So interesting. I know you and I have talked about this before because, as the viewers know, my wife went through a stint with cancer last year. She obviously, you never really are past it per se, but she's on the mend. But something you just said that was kind of interesting is, and I'd love to understand a little bit more, is in your work with these nonprofits or this nonprofit, and trying to help them understand how they can leverage the technology that either they have or that they are looking to acquire. Have you noticed a difference in how their outreach to their groups or the communities that they serve, how that has been shaped and or has changed from some of the work in part that you've helped them with?
Absolutely. So right now they're actually looking at leasing a mobile vehicle and not necessarily being beholden to a brick and mortar office. So they're really embracing what Cisco has always been great at, as far as meeting you where you are, and embracing mobile and technology as a way to genuinely connect with others. So right now we're kind of exploring a mobile bus strategy, utilizing some of our subject matter experts who are really great and understand the telemedicine aspect of that, as well as looking at the philanthropy business, as more of a partnership with these different tech organizations. So instead of asking tech organizations for sponsorship for any virtual events, any a la carte event, is really taking a step back and looking at it as how can I position Bay Area Cancer Connections as that subject matter expert organizations that tech employees can go to when they have a diagnosis or they have a family member that's being diagnosed, for that information in that database of knowledge. So that's been a exploration process in and of itself, but it's one that I think a lot of nonprofit companies are looking at as a change model, as a disruption model in a positive way.
That's awesome. Have you noticed hearing all of that it's beyond amazing is like the only word that comes to mind, but it's such an understatement to say it like that. What it strikes me as, and I think it's a world that a lot of people, including myself, aren't very familiar with when you're not this close to nonprofits like this one, or organizations that are trying to really give back and support a community in these ways. And it gets missed, I think, in a lot of communities, is that there's a lot of organizations that are doing things like this, and they do have a real impact, and they're actively thinking about a way in which to better connect with their community in the way that that community needs. And I have to imagine that probably translates to other, or that same mindset exists for other groups that are like trying to support, either marginalized communities of various reasons, or, through the vote, that, the whole issues with the election last year, finding ways to connect with, or like local groups that, either don't have access to the vote as easily as they need to, or are afraid of it for various reasons. I've got to imagine on the cancer side, and my wife went through this too, and it still does, it's hard to find. It's not that it's hard to find information on cancer, as an example. You can Google anything. It's hard to find information in a way that makes you feel like you have permission and you're comfortable reaching out to a group, and that it's okay to do that. There's this innate sense of like, I don't know if I really should reach out to the group. I'm not really sure if that's where I should go, etc. Yeah. Have you noticed in the work that you've done with them, or at least what they've told you as a result of some of these either technology implementations or things like getting a bus where they can get physically out on the streets and go talk to people? Have you heard either from them and by proxy from the communities they actually serve, how that has impacted those communities?
Still early on in the process, Jeff, to be honest, but from early on, I mean, we had to make, when COVID first hit, some of the objectives they gave the board members was to make cold calls and dials to people that have donated in the past. So that was something that we made like 100 dials, me personally. So going back to my SDR roots when I first began Cisco, and literally just calling people with no objective in mind. It's just, we did a check-in on how are you doing personally. If there's any way that we can be of service to you, please let us know. And so I think just being available, right? And just trying to see how you can help and connect with others. People really did appreciate that. And so I think if we're able to keep that in mind, before we ask for the money or for the commitment, I think that builds trust and loyalty. So people are going through cancer diagnosis, or they have family members that are going through this journey, just re-emphasizing that we're being there for them whenever they need us. That is one of the greatest assurance that someone can have.
It's super powerful for you to say that. I mean, one, because it resonates as objectively true to me, specifically because relationships are the foundation for all of it. Whether it's the role you do in sales, which is founded on having a strong relationship with another human being or a group of human beings. And in the work that you're describing right now, I mean, the core tenet there is establishing a relationship with somebody else, whether it's for the purposes of, hey, can you help financially support this group so we can serve other people? Or it's working with an individual to say, we are here to support you. How can we help you with that? The only way that really works is to build that trusted relationship. And that starts from, hi, how are you? And asking and talking and building this empathic sort of connection with that person long before you get to any sort of like, how can we help each other? It's, I want to help you by building some empathy with you first. And I'll be honest with you, I've noticed that in the years that we've worked together or worked around each other, I've always noticed that in the way that you approach what you do every day, not just working with partners in Cisco's world, but also working with sales teams like I was on and customers, is starting with that empathy first piece, which allows for a relationship to almost like naturally occur rather than trying to just walk in and shake hands. And to oversimplify it, people who know me I've talked about this, is I am not a fan of networking events. Like the classic, like, I'm going to go to a networking event. I don't do those ever. I can't stand them because they always seem so selfish. Like, I'm going to this to hand out business cards so I can get something from someone else or vice versa. That actually bothers me a lot because it's like, that's not the point. The point is to build a human connection with somebody else that yes, it will always result in something beneficial for both people, but that benefit can simply be that I have a new relationship with somebody else. Doesn't need to be more than that. But I think that the work that you've done, the way I've seen you approach that it's been inspiring for me because it's always has seemed to start off with, I just want to have a relationship with you. Whatever happens after that point will be whatever happens later, but that's not why we're here right now. And it's just, it's motivating to see that. But to transition just a little bit, I wanted to ask you a bit about unless you had something to add there, I wanted to ask you a bit about the new one of the new projects I've seen you working on. I've seen a few of your posts on LinkedIn, these videos that are really well edited, and I just would love to kind of get the background on that, what they're all about, and then how you came to the realization you wanted to branch out and do something new.
Yeah, absolutely. So in high school, I actually volunteered at NBC 11 in the sports department. So I've always had a genuine, curiosity and interest in journalism. However, I was a business management major in college and went through the Cisco sales program, and really the rest is history from there. But going back to disrupting myself when COVID first hit, now that we're all in front of the screens, experiencing some level of virtual fatigue, going back to 30-minute meetings all day, but still wanting to genuinely connect better than anyone else, I really looked in the mirror and said, how can I do this? And really the answer is video technology, right? It's fun, it's innovative, it's creative. And so I've been, through using the Beyond platform. If you guys are familiar with Beyond, it's sort of like iMovie meets voice narration recording, and putting it all together into an impact videos. So I've been able to really create a brand here internally within Cisco, for creating video on demand enablement, sales training for my direct sales peers that I work with. And then also now starting to branch out to some of the partner enablement stuff. Well, just utilizing 2D animation. So I've been learning a lot around that process. There's a lot that goes into it, from script writing, to getting the voice recordings down, to what type of software that you use for post editing. But it's been a tremendous blessing, just to be able to find just this mesh of talents that I've been able to kind of put together. So
That's cool.
yeah.
So two follow-up questions. The first one would be, sort of what would you, if you were to really kind of try to articulate what the sort of ultimate goal is or what is it you're trying to accomplish? Do you really want to be the output or people to take away from this content you're creating, these videos? I'd be very interested to hear what that is, and I think the audience would be too, what that is. But I also really curious about why now? Like, why you're obviously tapping into talents that you didn't, you always had, but you're kind of like codifying them. Like, you know what? I'm going to buckle down and just focus on this thing. Why now? Why pick this time, in the last couple of months or so to do this as opposed to waiting another year or 2 years ago? Why do you think now is the time that you're like, yeah, you know what? I think I want to do that.
That's a great question, Jeff. I think, again, introspection. There's never going to be a better time in history. I think while we're all living from home and not traveling, to pick a talent and kind of run with it. So I think right now it's taking advantage of this opportunity, and I think I've been able to do that, by just doubling down and putting in my 10,000 hours and practicing and making these videos and recordings for people. Outside of work, I created a company, Life Quality Brand, and really the goal there is to help people better tell their career and life stories. So it's about telling, being able to talk about the career accolades, but also it's about the peaks and valleys, because I think we genuinely connect as human beings through challenges and things we've had to overcome. And so, my goal there is to just amplify that messaging this year and beyond. So it's been a blessing so far.
That's awesome, dude. So I didn't know you created that external company, and that's just rad to hear about. And it touches on something that is so near and dear to my heart, which is the idea of storytelling. Because storytelling at base, at least from my perspective, is this idea of taking a topic or a subject that's really complex and conveying it being able to convey it to a wide group of people that is understandable by all of them. So like, you just change what you're trying to say and you tell a story in a different way that people can, oh yeah, that work. I get that. It works for me. So you just said something about that goal of getting people to be able to tell their own story. It's super interesting to me these days, because I feel like, especially now that we're all so much more remote, and the only way we can really connect is in these video calls. We can do phone calls, but I mean, yeah. I'm going to be a smartass, but I have a hard time picking up a phone and just calling the person and talking. Like, I'm really not good at doing that. It's usually via text message, and it's so powerful when you can just simply pick up a video call and like, hey, let's just chat for a little bit. I've got to imagine that And actually, this should just be a question. In people that you have worked with or that you are starting to work with as part of that new company to help them tell their story, what have you found to be sort of the mix of people who are already comfortable telling the story, but they're not necessarily comfortable using video? Or is it people don't necessarily know how to actually tell a story about what their career, who they are? I mean, where would you say it sort of falls?
Again, I'm early on in the process, but it's a little bit of both. So one of the biggest opportunities was for me, I got career coaching. So I basically went through ground zero of how do you actually tell a better career story. So that was mind blowing for me just to learn about how can I apply that story arc that you hear about in a typical movie scenario, and apply it to your own career life. So here in sales, you get a lot of resume jargon, right? And it seems very impersonal. But really what people want to hear is, okay, you've done these great amount of things, you've blown out your number, you've climbed the corporate ladder, but really it's about the personal challenges that you've had to overcome. And so now that I've been working with others, the biggest hurdle so far that I've had to help others push past is vulnerability, right? You already know what you're doing well, but what are the things that you're not doing well? And do you feel comfortable sharing them? Because at the end of the day, that's the glue that we use to put a cohesive story together.
Oh, yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, I still struggle with it personally, and I know many people do. It's a tough one because in order to have a relationship with somebody else, you have to be a real human being. Like, you've got to be able to let some amount of your guard down so that you both recognize that you're real and you can do that. And you have to, I don't think enough people have recognized, probably because of some I'll just say nicely, some dated ways of approaching how to go about a job or how to go about a career or how to view those things. Many people who have come up through the ranks over the last 20 years in their career aren't necessarily good at exposing those things. They're like, no, you're supposed to show off all the highlights, not the lowlights when you're trying to interview for a job or what have you, because you want to talk yourself up so you can get the job.
Yep.
And I think you just said it, like it's been missed for so long that that's actually not what hiring managers or other people really want to know about you. They want to know who you actually are, because I think we talk about this for hours. There's like you coming in as a person to a team. It's not about, are you going to change the culture? Can you mold into the culture? It's how can you help add on to the culture that already exists? But the only way that you can do that is by being an actual human being and feeling like the things that you do really well and the things that you admittedly want to become better at are okay and accepted, and that you can learn and grow in that position and add to whatever's there. But that does not get talked about hardly at all, at least not yet.
And, we're getting invited into people's homes now more than anything, right? If we're meeting with each other now in this COVID environment. And so you have to, before you jump into business, you have to talk about how someone is truly doing, right? And you want to get to know them. That's the only way that we can push past and to really build that relationship before you just dive into the numbers. It's understanding the why. Why are you motivated? What drives you? How are you truly doing?
Mm-hmm.
How are your kids doing? Right? That's been people remember how you make them feel more than anything else.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I know that, and I know you and I've talked about this before, but we're both Simon Sinek people, like the why. Just saying the why, like it seems like such a simple thing, and it's probably been over quoted and overused in a lot of circles now at this point. But I think it still holds really true that if you can understand or at least articulate your why, or ask or realize that when you talk to another person, you want to build a relationship with them, that trying as best you can to start to understand their why, or just why do they get up in the morning, that is really a good way to approach building a relationship. Because then you start to understand who they actually are. And it's not so much that, you want to overfocus or underfocus on their flaws. It's not about flaws and all that. It's understanding just who they are as a person. And none of us are perfect. We all have things that we're great at, things that we're not comfortable with, things we're self-conscious about, whatever. It's trying to understand this so you can realize this person's not that much different than I am. They're different because their things are different than me, but they're not so much different in the construct of being a human being. We all have those things. They're different per person, but we all have them.
Yes, absolutely. I can't I forgot where I saw it, but there was a recent story where a manager asked her employee, "How are you doing?" And the employee said, "Fine." And the manager said, "Nope, let's try that again. How are you doing?
I love that.
How are you truly doing?" Right? So it's sometimes we get lost in that because we're going from back to back calls as far as just dialing it in and saying, "Oh, we're good to go." But are you truly good to go? Is the question. And what are you working on to get better?
That word "fine" in a relationship I was in many years ago. Um, my partner at the time, she used to say, if I ever said the word "fine," like I'm fine, she would like, do not ever say it to me again. And she's like, I hate that word. It's not a real response, and it didn't matter what it was. And it took me a little while of hearing that, be like, don't tell me what to say. But eventually, I grew up a little bit more and realized that the word actually did sound. It was almost dismissive. Like, I don't want to form an answer to give to you. I'm not prepared for that. I don't have the energy, or I just don't want to engage with you. So I'm just going to insert this filler word "fine." And it doesn't mean anything. And I feel like I've seen whatever you were referring to, or I saw a manifestation of that someplace, but I think more leaders or friends and family members can use a tool like that to say, someone never says "fine" to you. Whether they mean something negative or not, think of it like a filler word. It's like, no. I'm going to ask you a question. Give me an honest answer, or tell me I don't have time to talk to you right now. I'd rather hear that than "fine."
Yeah.
Because
you have to unpack that.
exactly.
More. There's more behind that. And so we're talking about, and especially with everything that's going on, like with racial injustice and everything from a world perspective, we talk about there's power in proximity. And so connecting with people that don't look like you or don't have experiences, that's the only way that you can learn to grow and practice that empathy and connecting with people, others that have different experiences, right? Is going a surface level deeper.
Yeah, this is a terrible example of this, or relative to what you just said, but I think it hits home. Do you know who Adam Grant is? Do you know the name?
No.
Okay. For the audience, I've mentioned his name a few times, but he's a workplace psychologist. So he does a lot of social science around how people interact with work. Anyway, he did a podcast for a while, and he has been off for a while because I think he's been writing a book called Work Life. It was hosted by, it was a TED sponsored podcast. And he did an episode recently after his recent book came out. And in the episode, he actually invited J.J. Abrams to come on and interview him about his book, which was super funny. In it, though, there was a situation where they were talking about some research that he did in the book. And the example he used about, like, how do you connect with somebody else who you have such a different opinion about something with? And so he was trying to find a way that, like, was where an example where the stakes of the difference between these two groups of people were super, super low, but the emotions were really, really high. So, like, you can be super emotional about it, feel super intense, but disagreeing has really no impact on real life at all. And so he came up with sports because that is a good example of that. And he specifically referenced people who like the Boston Red Sox or the New York Yankees. And he's like, and he went through, he basically described it as going through several iterations. And it's silly very relative to the topics you just brought up a moment ago. But what he got to was every iteration you tried where you tried to get someone to build empathy for somebody else, it didn't work because the person just simply didn't understand the other side, in their viewpoint, the other side. And like, I can't get past that because blah, blah, blah. Yeah, maybe I could like one person, but the rest suck. Like, it's a terrible way to view people from a sports side. But what he got to, and he realized at the end, and he wanted to explore it more, is what really helped in the end was asking the person, an individual, the question of, if you were born in the same place as that other person, would that shape your opinion? And he said that was the place where he actually got people to respond, huh, and like stop and think for a second and go, yeah, maybe it would. Because and he said he hasn't done all the research on it, but what it started to imply, and kind of what I took it as, and you bring up racial injustice as a really key example of this, is for people who either have a different opinion or view it from a different perspective. I don't want to go down that hole too far on this show, but for people who have that dissenting opinion from what you and I share, going to those folks or anybody else in situations like that and getting them to think for a moment, like, but what if you were born there or born in that situation? Would this be different for you? And just getting somebody to think for a moment about somebody else. And I think it's too simple to say, put yourself in their shoes, because you can't. You've never grown up that way. So I don't understand, and they don't understand me, vice versa. But if you can get them to stop to think for a minute, would the idea of even growing up like that person or living in that place that that person lived, coming up with their upbringing, do you think that could change your mind about how you view something? And just get them to think for a moment. Just think about it for a minute. I think that alone can make such a huge difference.
Yeah, I've been learning how to apply empathy in my life. As you mentioned, I'm a new father. My baby girl Stephanie, she's a year and a half. So I'm a first time father, and really she's been giving me a reflection of some of the biases that I've had to push past as a male, and trying to understand what it is to be like a female in the workplace and the things that females go through, the challenges, right? And just to be empathetic towards that and trying to understand that, because obviously she's going to grow up one day to become a wonderful woman and to go on to accomplish a lot of things. And so I want to be there for her when those challenges come. On the flip side, like my fiance, she's Chinese. So, she's been dealing with, discrimination when it comes to COVID, and really educated me on some of the just horrible experiences that are going on right now. So this whole empathy, it can't be a buzzword. It has to be something that you have to apply and work at it each and every day.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. It is the foundation to building a relationship with any one person or group. And until you can at least understand what the word means and how to at least try to leverage it in some degree, like that's where you have to start. You have to begin there.
Absolutely.
Lewis, it has been awesome having you on the show today. I would love to keep talking about these things with you all day. Like every time we get on a call together and we start talking, like I feel like the time is never long enough, ever. But before we wrap up, I'd love if there's anything you want to call out for the audience, where they can find you, work that you're doing, some of these charitable organizations, and give back. What would you like to share with it?
No, thank you for having me, Jeff. Again, it was a pleasure. Please, Bay Area Cancer Connections, BACC. Please check them out as well if you feel like donating or contributing to their organization. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Life of Quality Brand is my company, but just search for Louis Caesar IV for my videos. And if you ever want to connect with me to better learn how we can tell your career story and get it animated, I would love to hear from you. So thanks again, Jeff, for your time today.
Awesome, man. Thank you again for being on the show. And for everybody, I will put, we'll make sure to have in the description below and the show notes, all the information about how you can reach out to Louis. Louis, again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
And everybody, thank you again for joining for another episode of At Home. The show doesn't happen just because I love making videos. It happens because you all are engaged and you want to be part of the conversation. And I've heard more and more recently, more and more often recently from you folks in the audience about how these videos have impacted you, and like watching a particular video and like realizing that it resonates with you in a different way. And that's really the point, is that not everyone's message, every guest message who's on the show is going to resonate with every single person, and that's okay. But you start to realize that these problems, these huge problems that we may not be able to tackle all of them, we can at least find ourselves relating to somebody else you see here. And it can really start to spur up some conversation and some motivation and some thinking that we didn't do before. So I appreciate you all being here. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up on the video. It really does help the channel. You can hit the subscribe button to see all the new content coming out. And there's a little bell icon. Just click on that and you get notified whenever new things come out. I release new videos every single week. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.